to our wonderful panellists who are joining us to discuss this really important topic on sustainability, a topic that's definitely been covered a lot today. And we've been having the discussion with the panel members throughout the day, actually, around sustainability and what it means to us individually, and just how subjective it is. So with that, I'm going to start and open the panel to ask that question. What does sustainability mean to each of us? And I might go around the panel, and then we'd love to get some involvement and interaction from the audience as well, and we'd love to hear from you too. And then hopefully that'll position the rest of the discussion for this afternoon. So Angela, what are your thoughts? What does it mean to you?
Look, I think it has a really broad term and reference, but in terms of environmental sustainability, it's certainly about maintaining our impact in what we consume and how we consume that. And from my perspective, that very much relates to the creative industry and the arts and how people actually utilise what they make, and if they don't do anything with it, where does it go then?
Fantastic. Kirsty?
You'd think being a sustainability consultant, it'd be really easy for me to answer, but in 25 words or less, it's quite a big one. But simply put, sustainability is, to me, it's about making the best and most appropriate choices in your circumstance. And circumstances can vary from person to person and business to business, and the reasons they vary can be huge. It can be your location, it can be the industry that you're in, the suppliers that you have, the staff that you have. There are so many different things. And I don't want to get into all the elements now because I'm interested to hear what everyone says, because I do believe it is different. It means different things to different people, and I often meet people on their sustainability journeys at different places. So I'm going to leave it there, and I might jump back to that if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jodie.
No worries. So I'm an engineer and I've got a bit of a technical background around sustainability, and I spent a lot of time sort of understanding and putting numbers around impact and how much negative impact we have on the environment. Every time we jump in our car, every time we eat something, that coffee you just drank, you're building up negative impact points, right? So I spent a lot of my life trying to sort of reduce that negative impact on the environment. And I guess in the last 10 years, I've been really excited about flipping it over and thinking about legacy in what we do with sustainability. So how can we actually create a positive impact? So I think for individuals that kind of how do I reduce my impact on the environment from a day-to-day perspective, but it's really exciting when you're working in a professional sense because you can be thinking about legacy and how you can create positive environmental and social impact. So that really excites me about sustainability and that linkage between business and sustainability as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. So now we've got Olivia out in the audience, and we'd love to throw it open and to get some further insights from you around sustainability and what does it mean to you personally, and how do you incorporate it in your day-to-day life? And or you could even answer how do you respond to it in your main streets or in your small business. So I was wondering if anyone wants to put their hand up, or if you don't,
Please
shall
be brave.
I point at someone? And no, I definitely don't want to do that. Oh, there's a hand. Oh, fantastic. We've got a couple. Back row. Thank you so much.
Hi, Kerry Daly from Campbell Junction Shopping Centre. I'm just putting my hand up because I see this issue, and it may sound a little callous, but I see it as a tremendous marketing opportunity. Camberwell, as you know, or I'm sure you would know, was recently, Josh Frydenberg was ousted by a Teal supporter, primarily over climate change. So clearly that said to us, our community is very, very conscious of the impact we're having on the environment and are very environmentally aware. So in a purely marketing point of view, it makes a lot of sense for me to tap into that and say, well, okay, what are we doing locally as a business organisation to reduce our impact? What are our traders doing? And when I went looking for different examples, so many of our businesses are doing some simple but exciting things. You know, it might be Suzanne's are doing an upcycling program. I think Witcher have got one too. I think most of them nowadays have got, clothing opportunities that get repurposed and things. So that's just one example of that category doing something. Then, of course, our food operators, we've been working with Burundara Council on a pilot project for Camberwell, helping our retailers find other resources for their takeaway containers, straws, etc., and working with them one-on-one, which is really important, as we talked about before. That's the best, most effective way to work with them. But getting those stories, putting them together on our centre website to share with our community what the businesses are doing, so that there's a bit more of engagement between the community and the businesses, and some recognition that we're trying to do something, and showing ways for our community to be preferential in their engagement with traders that are doing something. So that's just a little bit commercial, but it's a good business sense.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kerry. I think maybe having a look with your own expertise, like what other examples can you give around businesses on main streets that are embracing sustainability?
Look, I think from our perspective at Renew Australia, we work with creative enterprises who make or create their own IP or wares. So they're often not just selling, but also producing what they have in their spaces. And of the 24 or so spaces that we have currently active around Australia, I'd say at least a third of them have a specifically sustainable lilt. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that they are selected into our program because it's an opportunity to demonstrate future use in a vacant space where the community can connect with their sustainability story, very much as our last person was speaking to, sort of, while it does sound a little dirty to add sustainability and marketing together, it can actually be really, really beneficial. We've certainly seen great success in that, from artists taking artwork that's no longer used and repulping it into paper and selling it back to other artists for them to use. We've recently had an alumni who made pens out of hand-recycled ink cartridges, have their pens now for sale in Officeworks, which is really, really fantastic. But I think really when it comes to sustainability, it's about a story, and it's how people can connect to that story. And we certainly see that if that sustainability story can directly impact the local area, we see a greater engagement on our main streets. So whether that be reducing waste and plastics that might hit the beach from Fitzroy Street, or whether it may be reusing or upcycling fabrics with the fashion industries, we see an increased level of engagement. But we also note that there are a lot of sustainable practices that aren't put forward as the primary story for a lot of these businesses, and it's really interesting to see if it actually needs to be featured, if your product is good enough. Is it an assumption that you can be sustainable and not promote yourself to be? Or do you actually need to have all the logos and the stickers on your shop front to tell people that you're there? And so I think that's going to be an ongoing journey in terms of sustainability. And certainly when it comes to things like food and beverage, there seems to be some really obvious ways of doing it, less plastics or reusable cups. But certainly for retailers who are packaging, there are some really great options, and we're seeing particularly less plastics in packaging, and that's been really successful on most main streets that we're working on.
Yeah, great examples there. Yeah, Kirsty, did you want to reflect or add to some of those examples?
I would like to reflect on that. It's really quite interesting in that I find that, generally speaking, when I work with businesses who are trying to improve their sustainability practices, the first and foremost reason that they're doing it is because it comes from their heart. It's because they want to do it. Perhaps they're doing things at home. They've got the recycling right at home. They might have put solar power on. Whatever they're doing, there's a whole list of things, and different things apply to different people. Then they come to work and they leave work going, we don't even have a recycle bin. Yeah. Or what we're doing is, I'm selling this product and we can't sell this product, but we are, it's my job. Happens a lot in the medical industry, it's tricky. But because they're doing it from the heart, they're not doing it for marketing. And yes, there is a great marketing opportunity when it's done from the heart. Marketing can distort it when it's the driving force, of course. But I do find it's interesting, like when I look at, I was doing some work with Queen Vic Market earlier in the year. We actually did, it was during February when, Melbourne was still semi-locked down through choice. But people were coming there, and we actually did a tour of the market. It was through the Sustainable Living Festival, and it was part of our Bounce Back program to put a spotlight on sustainability. And what we did was we actually took people on a tour to see some of the more sustainable, shops in that area. And what was interesting is some of the people, it was probably about 50-50. About 50% of the people shopped there regularly, and 50% came just for the ride, which was great because we brought people into the market. But the people who shopped there regularly, every single one of them learnt about new businesses that they didn't know existed in the market that were doing sustainable things that supported them. One of them was a place called Rewind. And you can actually get your bottles of wine, you take your bottle back, you go back and you refill, and you just keep using that bottle over and over and over again. So you're not creating, the glass has a huge amount of energy in producing that. So that's just a little thing. And I looked at it and I looked around, there was not one thing, there was no signage anywhere telling me what they did. A couple of weeks ago with Plastic Free July, if you don't know Plastic Free July, it's a movement, you can look it up later on. It's about encouraging people to reduce their plastic and make lifelong habits. And I went out to Kingston to do a talk, it's Cheltenham, the Kingston Council. And I looked up a few places because I didn't know the area, just to put them on my list to give people some indication. And one was, it was a chicken shop, it was a little takeaway. And I looked on their website because I wanted to suss them out before I, put their name down. And they had on their website really great things. That was great. And I went there and I ordered and I stopped back. And I'm like, if I didn't check out that website because I was looking for a place that I knew had sustainability in mind, I wouldn't have stopped there. All they needed to do was put up a little sign to say what they're doing. I ended up doing a Facebook post and tagging them because I know the reason that they didn't do that was they were doing it from the heart. They were doing it because that's their beliefs and that's their ethics. And effectively, they need to learn how to do that because these are modest people. Yeah? Probably a bit over-answered. But
No, such a great point. And coming with that authenticity, it is so vital. So Jodie, I'm just wondering if you wanted to reflect on that and maybe even comment on the fact that there does seem to be a lot of, I think it's called greenwashing. Who do we dare mention where people just claim to
and
jump on the
greenwashing can be
bandwagon.
done maliciously, and it can be done from a very innocent place as well. People get really excited about things that might be recyclable or might be this or might be that, and they plaster it everywhere and they talk about it, and actually it might not be a great solution and it might not be quite the right thing that they're looking at. So sometimes it does come from a misleading place, and you can see it when people make up strange eco words and green words, and they kind of mash different words together. It's quite an odd phenomenon.
Hyphenated, yes.
Yeah, the hyphenated eco-circular greenism. There's a lot of it out there, and people are becoming increasingly sceptical about it. So it's really important, kind of, if you're going to engage, do it modestly and honestly as well. And if you don't have data on the impact that you're really having, and that data is sort of third party or independent, don't overstate as well, because people will pick holes in it very, very quickly, we find.
Yeah, absolutely. Such good points. The other thing I wanted to tackle was just there is a bit of a misconception that to be sustainable or to embrace, environmentally friendly initiatives as a small business owner or as someone, running a business on a main street, that it can be really, really difficult or really, really expensive. So what are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think that perception, particularly in relation to expense, is a major concern for most small business owners. And I think that really what we need to do is sort of hark back to what you were saying originally, which is understand our own impact and understand our own usage and how we can actually reflect and consider what we do in our own workplace, because each is so different. I think that we can all be sustainable, whether it's find that recycling bin and be that person who takes the coffee grounds home or, does all of those things. But there are really small steps that can become big steps. But I think going back to the expense is really the major response I get from small businesses. I can't do it, Ange, it's just too pricey. I've priced out this unit per 1,000 and it's going to be 2 cents more. And sometimes that really is the case, but sometimes it's also not. In fact, I was speaking to Colin from the Christmas display earlier today and just talking about his new sustainable offering when it comes to Christmas decorations, and that, you know, we've talked a lot over the last few years about how being sustainable can be expensive, and ultimately, you know, the discussion that Colin and I were having earlier was it actually works out about the same for many of their new sustainable products because they're manufactured here in Australia. They don't have the shipping from China. And we see a lot of that really, particularly when it comes to the food industry. You know, the food industry certainly seems to be a cheaper way of doing things because it is also often done in bulk, and people are really jumping on the keep cup bandwagon and the bamboo cutlery. But expense is usually the excuse that stops people researching.
Yes.
And I guess the big concern for me as I've been over the years is where do I direct people to make sure that they're educated, that their options don't necessarily have to have an extra $3 signs, but there is actually a central place where they can find those answers or find that experience from other retailers and traders who are at the same scale and find out how they made that step to being more sustainable.
Yep, spot on. And yeah, that definitely is up to us to try and dispel that, you know, that myth and concerns around cost. So Kirsty, just wondering, reflecting on that, what are some steps or some ideas that you recommend that businesses on our main streets could possibly take to embrace more sustainable initiatives?
In terms of what they take, this is quite general because each business is different and they're going to have their own different approaches. Sometimes looking at your industry is the way to look into it. So, for instance, for hair salons, it's going to be very different to retail. In fact, hair salons is a good one to talk about. There's a group, they're a business, they're a for-purpose business called Sustainable Salons, and Sustainable Salons support hairdressers to manage their waste. And they will do things like they manage the foils and they recycle the foils. Your hair, when it gets cut, they turn it into, they use it for collecting oil spills. You know when they do the oil spills? Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing what they do. I won't talk about them a huge amount. I don't know the ins and outs. Now, I know for something like that, and I was speaking to my local hairdresser who I've just switched to because I learnt she was sustainable. I couldn't believe it. I was driving to a hairdresser who I've been seeing for years, where I used to live, and I thought I can't keep driving that far anymore. And I went to the most local salon that I can walk to, and she's a sustainable salon. I'm so excited, so excited. But I asked her, it costs $3, about $3 extra per haircut to have this waste managed. Now, how much does it cost to get your hair cut? $3 is not much. Now, I don't expect a business to absorb that. I expect that to be passed on to me, and I am more than happy to pay $3 or $5 to know that she's managing that properly. Now, maybe not every consumer's like that, but in terms of a haircut, $3 really isn't that much. So, in terms of other businesses, hospitality, that type of thing, it's something I often get asked. It's like, well, we're giving like a discount on the keep cups. Who gets discounts on keep cups when they take them back? I never, ever, ever recommend a business does that. But the businesses who do that, why are they doing it? But if I was going to go and use my container somewhere, I'd just be happy they use my container. So don't think that you need to be giving discounts like that. The other thing to do is to look at what you're doing already. It's really interesting with the bags and the plastic bags. Plastic bags are an expense to every business. Like they might be small, but they add up. And it can be simply changing your words. Instead of, remember the Kit Kat example we had this morning? Instead of asking, would you like a bag with that? You could just turn around and say, you don't need a bag with that, do you? And it really does make a difference. And every time I hear, you don't need a bag with that, do you? I'm like, yes. And believe me, I find the biggest thing too is that I often hear it's like, well, it's just one more story, I'm not talking about, another thing with straws. I'm so passionate about this. Straws is a really, really interesting one because people say, well, we've got the plastic straw, now we're switching into a paper straw. I'm like, no.
We don't need straws at all.
We don't need straws. This is what I use instead of a straw. And I remember having a conversation in a restaurant quite a few years ago and explaining that. He said, with my kids, he wanted to put drinks into my straws into my kids' drink. And I'm like, really, we don't use straws at home. We don't need them. But he was so experience-driven that he wanted to give that experience of the straw because he thought that was a good thing. And I explained, if I was having a wine or a coffee, would you put a straw in that? We just don't need them. So when businesses are starting to make the switches, a paper straw is going to cost more than a plastic straw, but I'm here to tell you that you don't need to have that paper straw for everyone. Keep them there in case someone asks for them. Yes, offer them, but don't just hand them out. We really don't want them all the time. And the same with the plastic bags as well too. Again, just give out what you need and no more. It's the really low-hanging fruit that I get people to look at first, because things can have an expense. Sometimes they absolutely do, but sometimes they don't. So start by looking at the things that you can achievely do, and they'll save you money.
Thank you.
Can I jump in, Liz?
Absolutely, please.
I really liked the talk of the approach of looking at what your sector does, right? What do other hair salons do? What do other food areas do? And I think that's spot on. What are your sectors doing? The other approach is that place-based approach as well. So one of the best examples of circular economy in Australia was on a main street in the Sunshine Coast, where a couple of magnificent women that now have a business called Choreo went up and down the main street and tried to figure out what were all the waste streams that people were producing, where were all their pain points, and put into place collective solutions for that. So there's that it's sort of like the front of house stuff where you're engaging with consumers. How can you make it a high value thing? I'm giving you an extra service with your hair, so you're going to come to me instead of going to the next person. So it might cost a bit more, but if you're getting more customers in the door, so what? But then there's all the back end of stuff where it's non-competitive with your neighbours as well. How can we manage those things together? And I think in a lot of places, well, I hope there's a lot of people in this room that are at local governments and things that are encouraging that amongst their businesses as well. And I know when I lived in France, that was a really big part of how they worked, that collaboration of what problem do we all have together. We can compete on some areas, but how do we manage all those things together and create scale so that we can manage them effectively? And then you can look at the costs come down quite quickly because you can co-invest in material and things like that.
Yeah, fantastic. Great insights and contributions. I'm just having a look at the time. I think we've got about 15 minutes left. So maybe another 5 minutes, and then we might open up and call for questions. So please, please get your questions ready. But Angela, I wanted to have a chat to you about your own business model for your organisation. So you're a social enterprise. So that's Renew Australia. So, and this is speaking to that rise of a new type of, business model, and some of them are appearing on our main streets. And what I love about that model is the way that it is embracing, CSR and ESG, and it is a for impact, for purpose business model. So it's not just about, commercial outcomes and profits and bottom line. So I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about that and how that influences the work that you do in activation and just from a, ethical and, principle sort of perspective?
Yeah, sure. I think, Renew Australia is a social enterprise certified by social traders, but we're also a not-for-profit with DGR1 charitable status, and we're a consulting firm, which is pretty fantastic, and I've had the pleasure of working with many of the people in the room today. And I think really it's actually a really great example for the businesses that we put in spaces that we are purpose-driven. And I think it sort of harks back to the sustainability story in that sense, that Renew Australia exists to provide opportunities for creative enterprises to trial an idea with minimal overheads and take a risk. That's why we do what we do, so we can capacity build young businesses. But there are a whole lot of flow-on effects to that, supporting existing traders by complementing, not competing, keeping the footfall on a street, keeping interest and excitement. But it really comes back to that purpose. And we're really familiar with social enterprises, whether we know it or not. And often social enterprises are very much linked to sustainability and a sustainable purpose. I mean, I know that one of the speakers already spoken about probably the most well-known social enterprise that many people use, which is Who Gives a Crap? Thank You, all now supermarket brands that we see which are fantastic. And we certainly try and give as many social enterprises a leg up, but also a lot of startup businesses who don't know about social enterprises and perhaps they're on the way to becoming one. I think particularly when it comes to sustainability, noting before that they can go hand in hand, and when you're purpose-driven, if you can lead by example, that purpose often then uncovers other issues, problems or opportunities along the way, and that's very much what we see on the main streets when it comes to social enterprises, because you can have a purpose, but that doesn't mean you do everything perfectly. Absolutely. So a great example of that is Who Gives a Crap? You know, it's a fantastic product, it's a fantastic service, it is not manufactured in Australia.
It's a very controversial one,
Yeah, and so that in itself adds to miles, travel, all of those kinds of things. So
I think Jodie wants to comment
Jodie
on
would
that.
probably love to comment on that.
It's interesting, and this comes back to you know, subjectively, what do we mean, and how do we define ethical and sustainable? Because a lot of people would say that Who Gives a Crap is fantastic and they love it because of the way they do their business. But not many people would know that it is made in China.
I
Love to I can see you dying to say something.
Yeah. Okay. So my background is in life cycle assessment. So when you're working life cycle assessment, you're trying to figure out what's the impact of that toilet roll from where it was manufactured, the transport, the shipping, etc. And my former company, Life Cycles, who's based here in Melbourne, we did the LCA of Who Gives a Crap. So actually asking all those questions to go, and they were asking really sophisticated questions about, well, should we onshore or not? And it was really fascinating because actually their shipping model is incredibly efficient because they ship out to each major city. So rather than so they actually looked at it and, okay, this is going to be very controversial, but if we were to manufacture in Melbourne and then truck it out everywhere, it was actually worse, the environmental footprint. So it's really interesting that we just automatically go, if it's not made in Australia, it's not sustainable. There's actually a really interesting ethical thing that I'd like to throw at everyone with that as well. Why is an Australian job more socially beneficial than a Chinese job as well? So it's really interesting to just question why we automatically, so I prefer to buy Australian made as well, in season, etc. That's my go-to. But it's really interesting to question actually what are the criteria and why are we making those choices as well? And that's a fantastic example of a business that's used Chinese manufacturer, which is good, and they manage them very well, very closely. They've optimised their supply chain. They're doing it for purpose. I give them 3 ticks.
That's great. Thank you for clarifying that. I wasn't aware of that, but that's great insight. Kirsty, did you have any comment, or did you want to reflect on those examples at all? I think we're okay. Or we can bring it back to we will. Yeah, absolutely. Let's chat about greenwashing, and then I'd love to finish off with just any more, practical tips. I love the examples that you gave, Kirsty, around instead of asking, would you like a plastic bag? Why do you need a plastic bag? Hopefully I'm paraphrasing you correctly. What are some other...
Right. Why do you need... You ask your customers, why do you need a plastic bag? And come to me and let me know what they say.
What's wrong with you?
do you... You don't need a plastic bag.
So what other practical tips can we give our audience that they can take away and look at implementing in their small business? The other one that I've got is I've noticed in my local cafe that a lot of people aren't taking their keep cups anymore. I feel like keep cups were a real thing before COVID, but now it just seems everyone's going back to disposable. I don't know if it's just in my area, but I think that's a valid question. Like the cafes should be finding a way to, insist that keep cups are, brought back in. So if we could maybe have a
I'll start with the keep cups if you like.
Yeah, please.
What happened in COVID with the keep cups is that a lot of businesses thought that they shouldn't do it. And there were some very large ones, I won't get into name dropping, who decided very, very early in the piece that they weren't going to be accepting the reusable cups, which actually put a wave of fear through basically most businesses. The most local business to me that does the keep cups is a place called the Full Pantry in Croydon. And they made a decision probably about 18 months before the lockdowns not to offer disposable cups anymore. It was a big major decision, but they made that decision and they wore any consequences that came with it, and believe me, they did. So in COVID, they had a very, very big decision to make. And the decision they made is, we're sticking with it. So what you could do is you could go in and you could take your cup, you would put it on a tray. They wouldn't touch your cup, they would take that tray, they would make your coffee, they would bring it back, you would put the lid on your cup, they wouldn't touch your cup. They said it was safer than using disposables because they didn't touch that cup. However, not many businesses took that approach. But the good news is there's no legislation or recommendation to prevent you from using that reusable cup. However, businesses do have to make that shift back, and people have to make that shift back as well too. So as individuals, we've got to decide, okay, I've got to keep cup, I don't want that disposable cup used, I've got to take it back. It's not often the businesses now, because most of them are accepting them. And the other option is it's like, well, now you can actually go and sit in. So if you don't bring your keep cup, maybe sit down and enjoy it for 5 minutes and have an experience.
Fantastic. Thank you. Jodie, would you like to comment on maybe both of those closing topics? Practical tips?
I get to just throw it completely aside as well, because I think that's a great idea. No, there's lots of practical tips. They're really important. Let's talk about them over a coffee after. I just wanted to say something about the big end of town as well, because I think it's interesting to have a look at this sustainability shift, that this is no longer some hippie thing on the fringes either whatsoever.
It never was.
Oh, I think it was previously. I felt like trying to engage on this topic was, so I'm trying to think of something, pushing something uphill, and that now it is remarkably mainstream. I did a bunch of consulting for Kmart and Target. And I almost stopped and cried the other day because I was sitting in a boardroom of Target 3 years ago saying, you know, your clothes, they're actually not disposable. They're cheap, but they're actually good quality clothes. And like Target and Kmart actually do some of the best ethical sourcing in Australia. I know this is going to shock everyone, but they actually really manage their supply chain. That's how they get it cheap, right? They really manage every single bit. They know where every strand in their supply chain comes from, right? But yet people treat their stuff as disposable because it's cheap. So we were talking to them about trying to revalue their clothes, trying to explain that, you know, buy a pair of Target jeans, but keep it. For God's sake, don't throw them away.
They used to do that. I grew up with it.
They did.
Yes.
They did. And the other day, they had a big billboard out front saying, we make our clothes so that they don't run out and it doesn't cost the earth. And I thought, oh, this is mainstream doing that, and it's really exciting. And the other example is that I've worked for weird not-for-profits and strange little consultancies my whole life. And 2 months ago, I started working for one of Australia's biggest engineering firms that actually sought me out and came to me and said, we understand that this is changing how we design and build and manage infrastructure across Australia and Asia, and we want you to come and help transform our teams, build their capacity, get their heads around it so they can completely change the way we create the infrastructure around us. So this is happening in a really big way, and I think smaller businesses are going to have to keep up, because it's not enough for them to say, oh, because we're local, we're sustainable, because people are now asking more questions. They have to know where their stuff's coming from. How do you manage the things behind the doors? And I'm a bit worried that maybe those small businesses that really care and are doing it from their heart, maybe they're not asking enough of those diligent kind of risk questions. And I'd really like to challenge all the small businesses to kind of get on top of it and know where their stuff's coming from and how they're managing it as well for that sustainability angle.
Great advice. Yeah, thank you, Jodie. Angela, would you like to make some closing comments on either of those topics?
Look, I think spot on. But I think it kind of comes back to, for small businesses, back to what some of our previous panels were talking about, which is collaboration. The majority of traders that I see on a daily basis are overworked, they're tired, they're barely keeping up with their own general operational requirements, let alone opportunities to find funding or sustainability opportunities. And so I think, you know, work with those around you. For anyone in Melbourne, there's a brand new cafe in Collingwood called Zero Waste, which is a great example of how you take your passion right to the end. They use their coffee grounds, send them to a soap maker who's in our project with their milk waste. They make hand soap out of that, and then it's used throughout the cafe. There are lots of really great things you can do, but not everyone has that much time. So choose your tasks, decide where you want to take action, and go step by step. because sometimes it seems like such a big thing to bite off that it seems almost impossible. And when you're already exhausted and you're getting great advice, but you can barely get home to shower, the last thing that you really have time to do is sit on a website and review how you can make changes in your business. So think about something, the low-hanging fruit like we've talked about already today. Think about what your neighbours are doing. Think about how you can do it with someone else and stay motivated, because too often our businesses on main streets function like little islands, and those who are fortunate enough to have representatives to bring that street together might have some collaboration capacity, but there's a lot of main streets out there who don't have levies, who don't have coordinators, and they're really, really struggling. So small bites, work your way up to it, and if possible, work alongside somebody else, whether they be your neighbour on the street or someone else in your LGA or someone who inspires you. I think that's the first step to becoming sustainable.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that is all great advice and a great way to sum up the whole panel. So thank you. Before I thank you and we hand you your gifts, I would like to throw it out to the audience and see if we have any questions for our panellists this afternoon.
I definitely take your point about being able to tell our stories, and that's something in our business team at Kingston we certainly hope to do more. In my role, I've worked with the circular economy and sustainability, mostly with manufacturing, and there's a big gap now that we need to catch up and work with sole traders and retailers. And I just wondered whether you're starting to see that concept of optimising resources much more in some of the small traders, in terms of whether they're starting to think about the model of service and repair and reuse, rather than just thinking of waste as being the sustainability issue.
That's a whole other topic.
It's a great topic.
but I love it. You know, I wore these boots today knowing the question was going to be asked. No, I didn't. You know, these boots I've had for my son's nearly 16, so about 16 years.
Oh.
And I get the every time the sole, I've got to find the place to go to because they closed down. I get the sole replaced. And then one year I got them, when I bought them, they had a plastic zip. Now, I didn't think about when I bought them, they had a plastic zip and the zip broke. So I went and I got the zip replaced. The following year, the other side broke. 2 years later, something like that, it broke again. I'm like, I'm done. And I said, I want to have a metal zip put in there. And they're like, that's going to be expensive. I'm like, I don't care. It cost about $80. And so I put that in. It was probably about, 8 or 9 years ago, and I haven't had to replace that zip since. But I talk about my boots in the sense that, you know, it's getting harder to find people to replace, to repair boots these days. But, you know, my sister, who I thought was doing this forever, because the reason I do boots, I must admit, sometimes you do things and you don't do them for sustainable reasons. If I had to ever replace these boots, I would get one as close to this pair as I possibly could. So when my sister came and said, you're going to be so proud of me because I've actually, you know, what I've done. I'm like, what have you done? She goes, I got my soles done in my boots. And I said to her, what would you do if you didn't do that? She said exactly what I said. I've got a pair as close to these as I could. So repair is really, really important. And it's, when you talk about a service-based experience, that is something we need to see much, much, much more of. And then people need to be educated. Because we've got cheap clothes from Kmart and Target that people see as being disposable. And not just Kmart and Target, they're just the ones that were mentioned today. There's many, many more, don't worry about that. Same with the boots as well too, and shoes. When people learn about that, it's actually cheaper for me to get these repaired than to replace them. Yes, $80 I could buy a cheap pair of boots, but these pair of boots were bought to last for a long time. Same with clothing. You know, some people get a hole in a jacket and they go, it's done, and they toss it. Others actually go and get it repaired, or they get it visually repaired and that hole becomes a sunflower or a butterfly. So if you're talking about that in that big scope, the service industry is there. There is a challenge, of course, because sometimes it does cost more to repair it than it does to replace it. But I do believe that over time that's going to level out. So repair is definitely the way to go. Yeah.
Just to add to that, it's probably one of the most common applications we get into our programs is fix-it libraries. And there's some challenges in that themselves. Often they're volunteer run with no grants and no resourcing, just a good idea. And when you're talking about public liability of fixing someone's electrical goods, there's actually a pretty decent cost attached to that. And so while I 100% agree, I'm a sole repairer as well on these very boots, and I very much believe in fix it and repair opportunities. I think councils could really come to the party, much like they have with places like men's sheds, in terms of making a place available for skilled and qualified people to do repair work, who can charge for their services but perhaps don't necessarily have to worry about the overheads of an individual shop. So it'd be so lovely if there were more fix-it libraries across our council areas that work not just alongside but within council, and allow there to be one place where you can get a myriad of things fixed. Because one of the other things I think stopping a lot of people from the repair opportunity is seeking where they need to go to get it done, finding someone who's actually experienced enough to do it. And unfortunately, of most of the fix-it libraries we've worked with, they've generally wrapped up after 6 months due to volunteer burnout.
Yeah, right. Love that idea though. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Fix
the
a library.
ideas are fantastic. And when you start learning about circular economy, it's all about that, right? Moving to a service, and it makes sense. And why do I have to own my washing machine and all these things? And the barriers are so massive. We have moved so far down this linear route of take, make, dispose that it is very hard for a lot of reasons to get them up. Sort of technological, the knowledge and skills to be able to do it, the insurances, people's behaviour change. We've gone a long way. And that's why it's so important to have government intervention on this as well, because it's no longer a level playing field whatsoever. And in Victoria, you're extremely lucky because you've got the Circular Economy Business Innovation Centre, CBIC, run by Sustainability Victoria, that is really pushing those innovations and trying to identify and take away some of those barriers. So the discussions they're having are definitely being had, and it's a really frustrating area because you can sort of see it, it's just there, and wouldn't it be great if, but getting them up and running as viable businesses is extremely difficult and they need help.
Fantastic. Well, I know that we could probably keep on talking forever, but we do have to wrap it up, unfortunately. So thank you so much, Jodie Bricout, Kirsty Bishop-Fox and Angela Simmons. Thank you so much for being a part of our panel. And hopefully you've all enjoyed that session and learnt a lot around some of the practical ways that you can introduce some sustainability measures for the good of your business, your consumers, but also for the community and for the planet. So a big round of applause for our panel. Thank you so much.